Welcome to the Frontline Herbalism podcast with your host Nicole Rose from the Solidarity Apothecary. This is your place for all things plants and liberation. Let's get started. Hello, welcome back to the Frontline Herbalism podcast. I hope you've been enjoying this series all about herbal support through repression, and that my ramblings about care packages was helpful for anyone interested in doing sort of similar work. So this episode today, I'm actually resharing a podcast interview from another podcast. So I was interviewed on the Final Straw Radio, which is an amazing anarchist podcast that's been going for bloody years. Shout out to Burst, who does all the editing and is just super consistent. So I was invited to talk on a panel with two comrades, one from Belarus and one from Russia, to talk about the kind of impacts of like long-term prisoner support and just like general prisoner support dynamics, like gender and all sorts of things. And like when I was being interviewed, it was actually like the day after Taylor's, my friend who killed himself in prison, like his anniversary. So I was like very, very tender, and I definitely. He did a lot of editing to like take out my swear words or cover them up. But I was really going hard about how important prisoner support is and how devalued it is, and kind of a little bit of shit talking about some other anarchist groups. So anyway, I hope you enjoy this episode. I'll put some links in the show notes to where you can find the Final Straw Radio and the transcript and everything else. I guess just like a content warning that, we are talking about prison and state violence. So, okay, take care. Thanks.
Airing on Asheville FM 103.3 LPFM in Asheville, this is the Final Straw Radio, a weekly anarchist and anti-authoritarian broadcasts and podcast emanating out of occupied Chalagi land in southern Appalachia. We bring you voices and perspectives from projects and struggles all around the world, and you can find our archives, transcripts, ways to follow us and support us at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org. In this episode, we're sharing a discussion we had with three anarchists doing prisoner support in different national contexts, prompted by topics brought by the guests themselves. You'll hear from Moshe of ABC Belarus, then Nicole of the Solidarity Apothecary, and finally Anya of Solidarity Zones, as they speak on topics such as service work in solidarity, gender dynamics of care work, difficulties in ongoing organizing and long-term anti-repression work from within exile and diaspora communities, burnout, and self-care. Check our show notes, as usual, for links to the projects that our guests work on or resources that they mentioned.
I'll start. My name is Masha. I am speaking here as an individual, but also I'm part of the Anarchist Black Cross Belarus collective that has been supporting predominantly anarchist and anti-fascist prisoners in Belarus. And right now we've got around 25 persons behind bars, and 8 of them are long-term prisoners. That is like 10 plus year sentence. But also myself, I've been in a relationship with someone before who was in prison for 5 years. So it might be also useful for this chat where we're speaking about supporting prisoners and what it means for us to be a supporter.
Cool. I can go. Hey, I'm Nicole. I use she, her pronouns. I'm based in the southwest of England, and I am from a project called the Solidarity Apothecary. So I focus on supporting people experiencing state violence with herbal medicines. And I've been supporting people in prison for over 20 years now. My first boyfriend went to prison when I was 16. And just ever since, I've had different friends and comrades inside. And I won't name the collectives other than the Solidarity Apothecary, because my voice is I've got my own podcast, so I can't do this anonymously, unfortunately. But I've been involved in a bunch of different prisoner support projects, and I have various close friends still in prison who I'm sure I'll talk about through the interview, and kind of their experiences and how it's felt supporting them long term, as well as friends who have, killed themselves or died in prison as well. But thanks for kind of creating this conversation and this space to talk about all of this stuff.
I'm Anya. I'm here like an individual, but I'm also a member of Solidarity Zone collective who supports those imprisoned for militant anti-war actions in Russia. And mostly all this people who we support faced long-term imprisonment, and it's important conversation for me about long-distance support and about our resources and ability to restore ourselves.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for joining and for being willing to share this difficult conversation and all the experience that you have. So we're here to talk about these difficulties of doing anti-repression work, and in particular in the midst of bad dynamics in society and also repression. I wonder if each of you would talk a bit about the groups that you've participated in. You've already named some of them, who you support, and some more about your experiences around incarceration, if you have a history of it, if you've been close to people that have experienced that.
Yeah, so like I said, Anarchist Black Cross is a group that deals with anti-repression work and supporting prisoners currently in Belarus. Unfortunately, after 2020, after like a big uprising in Belarus against the dictatorship that unfortunately wasn't successful, and the regime still goes on. So many of our comrades, including myself, the ones that did not end up in prison yet, so we had to leave. So we mostly now live in exile. And it makes it problematic, actually, to support prisoners from like another country and not being able to actually be in touch with them, be in touch with the families, see faces of people, I don't know, talk to lawyers, and just generally not share the same space and the same, let's say, political landscape with the people that are just left behind there, right? So it's one thing, which I think for us as a collective, but also as people, it gives a lot of this feeling of maybe feeling that we have it better, like that we are not so affected by all this, but actually we are in our own way. And so it's always this kind of comparison between, oh, somebody's in prison for 20 years and I'm just there living in a European country and like just waking up in my cozy bed or something like this. So in many cases, it's like there's no space to talk about your own experiences, which is many cases is like migration experience and like living in exile and not being able also to see your family, or I don't know, losing all these connections. Yeah, but at the same time, like a lot of guilt or shame for this, like for not sticking around, or like, yeah, like just not being strong enough, let's say. At least me, I felt it in my first year of like exiled existence, that okay, maybe I should have stayed, and so it's very much connected with the inability to continue your political activity as before, and like now suddenly seeing yourself as like someone who's not there anymore. And also, I think in our case, the problem is mostly that throughout the whole history of existence of our collective, and because of the security culture in the movement, the ABC Belarus has always been an anonymous collective. So it's never been like people would identify us as members, which made sense because police didn't come for us in the first place. And this is why we also are able right now to continue the activities. But at the same time, that created this like, so in the movement that we kind of started to represent that structure that would like maintain the work and the care, like I would call it care work, right? For on the one hand, it's political work because anti-repression and supporting prisoners is political, but at the same time, it becomes a little bit like care work, that we become this specialized force that is just maintaining, that is collecting money, that is, thinking of how we don't get burnout and like keep doing that while the rest of the movement can just do their thing. And yeah, so that was like I'm probably gonna start with that, right? And so and myself, like I said, I used to be someone who was supporting people, not just my friends and comrades, but also like a partner. And also I saw what it's like to see that person being released, and what prison does to a person, and how it's important and like invisible sometimes, all this work of like re-socializing that person again, and like in not in a way that like adapting to the society, but in the way that like adapting even to the movement that is 5 or 10 years later than the time that they were picked up. And so that is another thing that I'm most probably going to touch upon deeper. And it's actually a little bit my fear, like what happens after all these years that our prisoners who are stuck in Belarus right now, what happens after all these years with them when they got out and the movement is literally inexistent. And so what happens to them and their political ideas, and are we a movement yet or not? So all these things are in my mind and in my head, and I feel a little bit alone with them because there's no open space where things like that could be discussed on this level.
I can go. So I guess over the last 20 years, I've been in different crews, and sometimes it's like a small kind of anonymous, like closed anarchist group supporting like very specific prisoners who are in prison because they've taken some kind of like political action, whether that's like a riot or whether that's, a campaign that they've had like repression for or direct action or whatever. And then, because I forgot to say in the introduction, like I also did a 3.5-year prison sentence when I was 21, which is where I met like lots of close friends who I then like continued to support. So then I was in this like weird space of like wanting to organize solidarity and like build a kind of like abolitionist anarchist movement to like just, destroy the prison system and the state. But like I was then supporting a lot of people who were just in prison because of, like class dynamics or trauma or, like because they're like a racialized person, and often would be like pushing up against other anarchist groups that wouldn't maybe like want to support them because they weren't like quote unquote political prisoners. So I've got like this whole bugbear about that around like who gets solidarity and who doesn't. But I know that's like a whole other podcast episode. But like I think that's also meant that I've done a lot of like family campaigning with like prisoner families around. There's a sentence in the UK called the IPP, the Indeterminate Sentences for Public Protection, which is like a kind of life sentence for people where there's like no end date, and you get one for like a minor crime. They've been like they're not in existence in the same way anymore, but there's still like thousands of people in and out of prison with this IPP sentence. So anyway, so I've done a lot of like solidarity work with families, like trying to get their loved one free or like support their specific person. And like I think there's this whole other layer of doing this work like as an ex-prisoner, because it's like, or like the comrade mentioned about, you've also experienced your own forms of repression, or you still are. Like I don't have the experience of living in exile, for example, but I've got the experience of being raided and arrested and all of this stuff. And it's definitely difficult supporting people in prison because you know exactly what they're going through. Like, just the things they describe, the things you've seen, like people being like attacked or hospitalized or, like beaten and dragged into solitary confinement, or like just everything that when you interact with someone, like it presses that button of your kind of own trauma. And then similar dynamic, like I feel like through my 20s, I just was stuck in this pattern of like, I can't enjoy my life or experience any freedom because my friends aren't free and like people aren't free. And like, why should I have a break if friends in prison are getting like tortured? And so that led to like a huge amount of sort of burnout and kind of a lot of trauma and distress and PTSD stuff, which, I've now worked through and I talk about a lot. And I, talk about herbal medicine in support for trauma and things like that. But like, I think there's just so many layers. Like if you're close friends with someone who's inside, if you like are in love with someone inside, like it's so different. But also like if you're just a human being that cares about other human beings and you're seeing them suffer like day in and day out through sometimes like the worst like imaginable trauma, it's hard. And I think like the comrade mentioned before me, like it, it's extremely invisibilized. And I know we'll talk about that more today, but your friend is somehow completely invisible and going through this traumatic, and then your support for them is also somehow completely invisible without any sort of like validation that it's like difficult or like necessary work, because you do feel like you can't complain because you've woken up in a bed and you can go outside and you can see the moon and you can put your feet in the ocean and your friend can. And it's like living some weird kind of double life.
As for me, I started some years ago as a person who supports friends in detention. And since that time, I participated in several groups in support of political prisoners and engaging in other kinds of political work. And when full-scale war in Ukraine began with a group of friends, at first we just found out that two guys were imprisoned with very weird situation during the arrest. And we decided to try to find them and offer them our help. And that's how our group called Solidarity Zone started. Then we found more and more persons imprisoned for direct action against ongoing war. And in this more than 3 years, we supported more than 20 persons accused on such cases in Russia. And for me, it's important to care about the community as well who involved in this political work and work of care. Because several years ago, I started to organize workshops on activist safety, and it became more and more actual because of growing repressions and growing sense of unsafety and vulnerability in communities and different activist groups. And now I see the dynamics I actually don't like in exiled communities and in those who are still inside Russia and working on the ground. I often see people in exile just lose all their energy on organizing. And for many of us, living doesn't go smoothly. It may involve physical persecution, crossing the border through forests, and many people change several countries before being able to settle down for any extended period of time to be able to organize there. And of course, the difficulties common to any person with migration background also do not add any strength and energy for activism. And as a result, the post-Russian communities are fragmented not only by borders and oppression, but also by frustration, burnout, fears, and different kinds of internal conflicts. And secondly, it's, I think, important to note that it's often the same few people who are involved in work of care for years. And of course, we are there, experienced much pain and disillusionment over these years and have questioned our own labor objectives, values for more than once. And as for the post-Russian context, I also see the split into talking heads from the activist networks and those engaged in invisible social reproduction itself. And surprisingly, it's generally Flinta persons.
Yeah, and just because a lot of the audience in the US may not be familiar with Flinta, it correct me if I'm wrong, but it refers to people basically who are not cis men, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that. I was thinking, because of the amount of experience in this chat, if at any point Like right now, I've been kind of conducting it like an interview, but if it wants to feel more like a panel or a discussion where you all respond to each other's statements with questions or what have you, I think that would be wonderful if you feel like you're up for it. So please feel free, any of you, to jump in at any point if you have a counterpoint or counter experience or something to bolster what someone's just said. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, cool. Thanks. Okay.
Sure thing.
Cool. Thank you. Otherwise, I'm just going to kind of go along with the flow of the prompts that I sent. What happens when the movement is crushed and support is left within a few hands, often living abroad? What difficulties do you face when you're hounded into exile?
So yeah, like I said, I gave some background information about our movement, and I think I wanted to expand on the issue of how movements generally function, at least in my part of the world, is that basically I'm part of the anarchist movement, which means there's no like party system where people are accepted and then they can leave, or maybe they have some consequences before they leave, so it's not so easy to leave, or we've got like 20 years in one party. That doesn't happen. So mostly what we are facing is that people come into the movement, they stay there for like some years. There is like very huge rotation because people get interested, then they leave, and sometimes they are leaving without even announcing that, right? So, and they don't have to because they're not like really responsible or accountable to anyone. And so it's like, yeah, I mean, it makes sense in this kind of situation where you are maybe like hunted by the cops all the time. And maybe at some point you realize that, okay, yeah, I'm interested in the ideas, but also that becomes like too dangerous for me, or I can't keep up with my work because, for example, in Belarus, anytime you get detained, you're also getting fired from work. And then you start looking for another job, and then maybe you have a problem because there's like a KGB agent at a new workplace that says no to you, to your application and stuff. So it really destroys, like being part of that movement really can destroy also like family connections and stuff. So it's like, I understand why we were so few. And so like, and that people are coming and going. But at the same time, when you're exiled, right, that means for us as a collective that is like, I think any basically solidarity group, right? So we've got people, our comrades, some of our friends, some of our partners, and then like we are in exile, and then the movement literally, it deteriorates in a way that like it just dissolves itself because, okay, we cannot really influence anything in Belarus anymore. So we form some collective in around something else, or maybe people just start living their lives. Maybe people just go and work or study or moving to further countries. And so what it leaves us with is that people who are not really like part of any structured collective that said, okay, this is our task and we want to support prisoners, just feel more free to just say, okay, I'm done with this politics and I'm just living my life, while people are like, the people that you knew still are behind bars. And so for me, it creates this kind of, I would say, like a weird dynamics, like that we are in a way expected because people can leave only because they know there is some structure that would anyway be there and take care of it. And, otherwise they might be feeling more, more necessary, that it's more necessary to stay and do something about it. And so I sometimes feel like, and also because we are this collective that we're not a collective that, I don't know, for example, a publishing cooperative that would say, okay, yeah, we're tired or we don't have any more ideas anymore. So we disband the collective and that's it, so, and nobody suffers in this way, so we just you don't have any more books or you start and stop a podcast and that's fine. But how about like you say, oh, I'm supporting someone in prison, and you cannot just say in 1 year, oh, actually, we are closing the collective down because we're tired, because that person that you supported is actually still in jail. So it makes it a little bit like impossible to stop or like put on and off your activity because it's an external condition that is imposed on you. And when I was listening to what Nicole was saying, like that for the like all these years, right? Like all the 20 years, like she had someone in prison to care about, right? One way or another. And so it makes it literally like your whole life would probably not be any window where you can say, okay, yeah, now there is nobody that I need to care about, right? And that's horrible to hear, but also it's a reality that we're in, right? And so for me, that is a challenge that I'm seeing, that sometimes when we take on and we say, yeah, we are going to put our energy into anti-repression work, then other people can just, say, yeah, then I'm just don't have to do anything and I can move on. And I know, like, I'm not saying this to, like shame anyone or anything. I'm also not taking up any other struggles that some people might feel that are important. And yeah, I understand that. But it's just this reality. And also in our case, the movement is not like really, when even in Belarus, like we had some new blood, right? So people are growing up, they become interested. There are students who are more radical and stuff like this. Being in exile, you only can count on your own diaspora, right? And this diaspora is very like closed up in a way that is not like, there's no new people appearing, and there's no new interest appearing among them. And also the diaspora is like very limited, a number of people, and also very, sometimes the views they're holding are completely different. So it's literally like, like people are, dying out in this way. And so, but also like the cause never stops being relevant. And I think this is something that I'm struggling with in terms of asking myself, am I really ready to like be in that collective for the next 15, 20 years? Because there's more and more people getting their sentences extended. And will I ever allow myself to like say, okay, yeah, now I'm actually moving on, or I want to join another collective? And that also, it limits my own activism, like I had to, shut down a lot of my other collectives or shrink my activity in anything that I might be really interested in doing as an activist, but I'm not doing it anymore and not doing it so much just because I have to focus on this one thing. And I think this is also, yeah, it like influences what kind of an activist I am, and like I'm kind of being stuck in that like care work forever. And this is maybe not what I wanted, and yeah, but at the same time, I feel trapped in a way. So I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that too.
I mean, I'm happy to talk about that feeling of feeling trapped. Like, I think that is a reality. And like, yeah, I recently had a baby, which has been amazing, but it was like really putting a line in the sand for me of like, hey, I matter. Like, my happiness matters. Like, other things I need to do in my life. Like, there is life beyond prison, if that makes sense. And yeah, that's been challenging because now I just have like a whole new form of care work on top of all the other care work that I was doing. But yeah, like, I think for anyone who wants to do prisoner solidarity work, like, I think it is worth saying that, like, for a lot of people, it is like a kind of short or medium term experience. Like, maybe a close friend is inside for a few years, which is still, can still feel like a really long time and is a long sentence. But I'm also sometimes frightened of like talking so honestly about it, because I'm like, why would anyone then want to do this? Like, if it's kind of like so politically invisible, like there's no like social capital to it, it's just like 99% invisible. And like, okay, maybe there's some like nice opportunities like traveling and meeting comrades or doing like speaking tours, things like this. Like, I know that ABC Belarus crew have lots of amazing like merch, and like, there's like obviously amazing things that like being involved in any kind of movement like brings to your life. But yeah, I think I just want people that are listening to reflect that, you do have power to interact with it how you want, if that makes sense. Like, I know some people that organize a lot of like abolitionist stuff, like in the so-called US against new prison builds, and they've kind of like consciously chosen not to have like one-to-one intense support relationships with prisoners because they can see how much it sort of takes over like that other kind of stuff they want to do in terms of like really like bringing the system down. So yeah, but I don't know, maybe it leads on to the next question that you'd prepared, Burs, about like the gender of care work, if you wanted to introduce that, unless the comrade from Solidarity Zone has anything to add as well.
Yeah, for me, there are several things I would like to say about communities itself. The community or communities originating from Russia, I would say that I see just the beginning of building these connections and learning from, for example, from Belarus communities, because a lot of people used to leave after 2022 when full-scale war in Ukraine began and repression started to grow. And I think it was like survival mechanism to build these connections between each other, because all of us end up in very different places, very different contexts. And we had to interact with each other to help each other and learn how to build a movement finally. And also, I would say that connections between people who stay inside these state borders and those who are outside and organize some part of the work from here that we are able to do from here. I think it's like very, very necessary to constantly address this community inside, because if you don't do that, you are just losing the mechanics of this repressive system and the logic of your political work, of your care work as well. And I can share the feeling of being trapped when you, as an individual or as a collective, have taken responsibility for this solidarity. And the present terms now in the current Russian context, the prison terms can be like 20 years. And it's as if you can't burn out or give up. And for me, it's scary and powerful thing at the same time. And yeah, I also feel that I can't choose any other field, because we are very few. We are like 10 people in collective and thousands of criminal cases and hundreds against someone who we sympathize or politically or personally who we know maybe.
Yeah, just to sort of comment on what you all have said too. As someone who has done anti-repression work for a while as well, including supporting individual prisoners, I'll attest it feels very difficult to see suffering and to put in boundaries to say that like this is as much time or energy or as many phone calls as I can take for a period of time and not to feel burnt out. Like that's very much my inclination is to just give it and see this increasing need on the other side, as the state increases or sustains its repression, to see that suffering and be like, well, I've got 5 more minutes here, or I don't really need to, like, I could take the day off of work or I can do whatever. It's hard for me to recognize that, like, well, I can't carry everything. I need to be able to sustain myself through the next day. And if I burn myself, I won't be all that useful to people. Yeah, just to sort of throw that in too. Moving on to the next prompt. Often the people who offer support to incarcerated people are relatives or close friends. Most often, the work is done mostly by women, like social reproduction or care work more widely. Can you talk about your experience of this?
I'm happy to go on that one. Yeah, like it's so interesting, like visiting prisons, because you see who the visitors are, and it's like always the mums or the like sort of devoted girlfriend or partner of a prisoner. And then you visit like a women's prison, and it's like so rarely the male partners. Do you know what I mean? Like most of them get like, ditched by their partners or whatever when they're inside. So it's like, it does like really compound that kind of gendered effect. I think there's so many layers of, it's just so entrenched, right? Like how we're so like socialized. Like we, as in I'm talking here as like a cis woman, are so socialized into caring about everyone else's needs and putting other people above ourselves from like such a tiny age. Like I grew up with a single mum who had like very severe kind of mental health issues, like lots of kind of depression and suicidality and abusive boyfriends and all the things. And it's just like not ironic, but it's like structural that I then ended up like repeating these patterns in adulthood where I'm just like endlessly supporting people who are suicidal, mostly because of the state violence they're experiencing. But yeah, I've been writing a piece, which I haven't finished yet, but about like solidarity versus like codependency, of where are we getting our kind of sense of self-worth from? And is that relationship kind of healthy and nourishing, or is it kind of reproducing oppressive dynamics? And yeah, maybe that blurs into like some of the other questions you prepared, but I'm still untangling that of what does it look like to be in relationship with someone when there is like such a huge power imbalance of, I've been the person inside who is dependent on my girlfriend visiting me, and the visits like keep me going, and my whole day revolves around lining up in the queue and calling her for that like 10 minutes of connection. So I know that kind of pressure from the inside, but I also can see the pressure from the outside. And I think it's really challenging. But I think unfortunately it is just kind of like a bigger pattern in the world in terms of patriarchy, of just women's caring labor is just completely taken for granted and completely expected. And I think that is part of the challenge with prisoner support is, people in prison can sometimes, it's a mix. Like some people in prison don't want to depend on anyone on the outside. They won't have visits from their family. They'll cut people off. They just want to go it alone. That's their kind of like trauma, hyper-independent survival pattern. And other people will just like really kind of, desperately seek support because, you need it when you're in prison. But that can often mean that there's like a lot of emotional pressure on the person on the outside. And maybe then it doesn't always feel like a kind of, it feels sometimes like something you're like forced into doing rather than something you're like embracing with kind of full consent, the way that you might be forced to do more childcare labor than you are hoping to do or expected to do, or you're the daughter, so you're expected to take care of your elderly parents, or you're the only friend that shows up for friends with chronic illnesses or disabilities, or other forms of health challenges, blah, blah, blah. But I feel like people listening to this probably, know all the things about gender, but it's just hard because it is just reproduced again in prisoner support. And, I know some like incredible male comrades that do like anti-repression work, but it is this thing of who does the kind of sexy public talk where they get a lot of kind of a bit more social capital or a bit more like adventure traveling around, and who does the kind of the visits and the phone calls, and they're like trying to support someone to not kill themselves that day. And I think that kind of labor is like, often like excruciatingly gendered. But I'm sure that other comrades have lots to say as well. So I'll stop there.
Okay. I guess I haven't realized how my gender, let's say, defines what I'm doing and how I'm doing it, and like how people see what I'm doing until recently, probably. But I guess I have experienced during when my partner was in jail, there was always like people never ask how you are, right? They always ask how's the partner, like how's the person in prison going, and most of the people would like always want to contact me, but like mostly these contacts like limited themselves to actually asking, because I was, and like you said, Nicole, like there is this power imbalance and like power dynamics between between the prisoner and the supporter, but also between the supporting person and the movement, because in some way you become that like point of contact for the whole movement. At least in Belarus, it's like that, because in Belarus, like one cannot visit or call a prisoner unless they are their close relative, like a wife or a mom or something. And so these people hold enormous amount of power in this way. I mean, maybe unwillingly, but like basically everyone wants to talk to them and ask about the prisoner, because this is where the information is flowing, right? And so basically what happened is like nobody ever asked me about like how I handle this. And I think back then I was also, I mean, I was in my 20s. I wasn't prepared for questions like that. And like I wouldn't understand why people would care about how I am, because I also felt like I'm numbing myself in order not to feel anything. But also after this experience was over, I also felt in many ways like an extension, like forever, you kind of stuck with that label of a wife of someone, And so I also talked, and I was in a chat group with some other female like supporters, most of them like wives or girlfriends, let's say, partners of somebody who was in prison. We didn't have a single man there. So in this chat, so all of them said that the way journalists or the media, or even, even the anarchist media, or, anyone who asks about something about like a prisoner is always focusing on the prisoner. And you're always like a partner of that guy, a partner of a wife of that guy, a mom of that guy. And in many cases, the journalists don't even give a name, So they are it's just enough to be like a wife, or prisoner met his wife, and that's enough, like she's a no name. And I mean, in this way, it's like it's also like a huge backlash, let's say, when somebody decides to break up when somebody's in prison. And so I have heard from some women that decided to break up after the sentence, after the verdict, or like just because they didn't they didn't feel like being in this relationship anymore, or they would break. The breakup was initiated by the prisoner or something. But anyways, it was always like she was supposed to endure it, like she was supposed to be like a nicer woman, or because he has all these like bad things happening to him in prison and stuff like this, and she's on the outside, so she had to like handle it in a better way, and not, like Nicole was saying, like just understanding that you can be happy, or like you have the right to also care about your needs is not there. And I think I kind of felt that. I mean, it's not that I wanted to break up, but I think that there was always in the background of like, how dare I, like not at that moment, And so I guess all this woman work is there. It's real, and and I'm also thinking, and again, like when the person is released, there's always this, all the attention is for that person, and that person really easily and fastly becomes somebody very famous, because everybody wants to talk to them, everybody wants to invite them. And then you're immediately forgotten, even though, like we said, before the arrest, for example, both of you were like on the same level as activists, as, like in some collective. And I think that is something that we should take care of. I mean, also like as a movement, I don't know, like, for example, haven't heard any conversation or any text like that, like where people who are supporting are talking about us, like not about necessarily prisoners. And so I think that there should be just more conversations about that. And I think including that would make it more reasonable for people to join, right? Like Nicole was saying, that it's not sexy work. Nobody wants to do that because it's like not gratifying. And so I think like one way to make it visible is like through talking about this, and like maybe kind of helps other people who are in a similar situation to understand that, like there's more people sharing this, and create their own spaces to talk about it.
And I often notice that when the woman called like prisoner's wife without a name, it's quite common to say that it's because of her safety. Maybe she wants to remain anonymous. Of course, without asking the person herself about her anonymity. Yeah, and I would say that Russian prison culture is very, very patriarchal, and like the state, this construction is, I guess, much broader than prison itself, than prison system. And it's kind of a way that affects how we interact with prison and with prisoners, and how we tell their stories, and how we silence some stories and care less about them. And also, I would like to mention here the project I really love, and which is opposing this structural problem with invisibility of women in prison and lack of support of incarcerated women. The project called Zhensky Srok, or Woman's Term. And there are only 2 female activists who work to support women in prison, not only and not necessarily political ones, because often women get huge sentences for self-defense, for example, or drug charges, and often not even their own, but their partners or husbands. And in most cases, they have absolutely no contact from the outside, not even with letters or calls. And personally, I see their persecution as no less political than one for speaking out. And the girls from Women's Term, in most cases, the only ones who help them with defense, with sending parcels, and spreading the word about their cases. Yeah, of course, I would like to call everyone to check their work and subscribe to them and support them in whatever way you feel you can. I see this project as the crucial example of anarchist solidarity in Russian oppressive context. And now we see more and more cases against women, political motivated ones, and I still see imbalance between support given to men and even the number of letters, the number of, articles, some kind of public campaigning for men is much more than this activities for women prisoners.
If you want to support The Final Straw Radio, you can subscribe to our podcast via various streaming platforms, follow, rate, and share our materials online, and learn more at tfsr.media. And if you'd like to fund our transcription work that allows for easier translation, more accessibility of content, and the zines that we produce for each interview, consider picking up some merch from us or making a one-time or recurring donation via PayPal, Stripe, Venmo, or LibrePay, or joining our Patreon to access early release content and other goodies via the links that you can find at tfsr.media/support. Finally, if you'd like to hear us on your local radio station, visit tfsr.media/radio to find more info or reach out to us for some help. Thanks for listening. The Final Straw is a proud member of the Channel Zero network of anarchist podcasts, and here's a jingle from another member of CZN.
The Frontline Herbalism podcast is a show for people who love plants and care about liberation. Plant knowledge, medicine-making tips, interviews, and advice on how to skill up to strengthen collective autonomy, self-defense, and resilience to climate change, capitalism, and state violence. Find the podcast at solidarity.apothecary.org/podcast.
Because we're approaching a half an hour after, the midpoint of an hour, and I know that Nicole has to go soon, would anyone mind if I skip the next question for the moment, talk about burnout, and invite Nicole to respond first, because I know that she's done a lot of work on this topic?
Yeah, I wanted to suggest the same.
How do we identify burnout when it arises, and what skills have you learned to combat it, avoid it, or treat it?
Ooh, juicy question. I think I'll just share a little bit about my own experiences and then what that's led to in terms of like tools and connections and things. So yeah, after I think I hit maybe the like 15-year point or something of like really intense stuff of, everything I've mentioned. Just, I was literally visiting a prison like every few days, 3 prison visits, sometimes a week. Like, I think, I realized like a third of my life was being spent in prison or traveling to a prison, and then was doing all this like organizing stuff as well, and all prison related. And my like brain just like popped, and my nervous system just, I had like a major kind of nervous system breakdown where I just couldn't leave the house. Every time my friends rang me from prison, I would violently vomit. It was really, really bad. And I think that was me neglecting the warning signs for a really fucking long time. But in that recovery period, I started kind of just literally blogging, writing random posts about, I just called it like overcoming burnout. And I just shared my journey of learning all about the nervous system and kind of polyvagal theory and what's like the fight-flight response and what's cortisol and, all these stress hormones, and how does this connect to like gut health, and how does this connect to, I wrote a post like patriarchy makes me tired, where I was talking about gender dynamics, and I talked like a lot about like class and, and it's still really coming from this very kind of white working class English context where I'm still just like swimming in a sea of privilege. But, like really talking about, the violence and the trauma of the prison system and growing up on benefits and all of this stuff and how it all connects and blah, blah, blah. And it just went really viral around the world, and people really resonated with it. And so Active Distribution, this anarchist publisher, like put it into a book called Overcoming Burnout, which I now sell, and the proceeds go to prisoner support, basically sending other books to prisoners. And it was this process that led me to really intensely studying herbal medicine and doing clinical training for 4 years with a school in Ireland, and, doing like thousands of other studies and different courses about trauma and all of the things. And now I offer support to people as a herbalist, where I'm looking at how plant medicines can support people at various stages, whether that's they're in this like chronic, unrelenting kind of stressful situation, because I recognize it's not just, you individualistically becoming calm or sleeping well or whatever. Like, it is, things that are outside of your control. And unfortunately, state repression is something that creates like massive uncertainty and, unprocessed trauma, and people live with like constant threats of, for example, deportation. Like, you can see all these ICE raids like in the US, and obviously they do them in the UK as well. So it's like people are living with this like constant state of like hypervigilance and fear, which just, wreaks havoc on the body. And there's whole fields of medicine that study, they call it in their like status language, like social determinants of health, but like, how does racism affect your health? How does class affect your health? Like all of these things. So we can't separate out the individual from these massive systems of oppression. But at the same time, and I had to learn it all back to front, if that makes sense. I had to learn that, okay, we can't maybe change overnight these massive systems of oppression. And I know the limitations of kind of lifestyle changes, but at the same time, there is a lot we can do, that we have to do, to support ourselves, like as human beings, like with a body. And I know people would maybe like to like not have a body and emotions, but like we do. So it's like, how do we tend to our nervous systems? Like, how do we manage our feelings when we've had like a really stressful phone call with a loved one in prison? Or how do we cope with our friend's cancer diagnosis in prison, or the death of our friend in prison, or, and yeah, how do we kind of like keep this work going? And I think there's so much I've learned about practical interventions like supplements and nutrition and the sleep cycle and trauma therapies. Like I literally have a whole online course about herbalism, PTSD and traumatic stress, which no one is turned away for lack of funds. Like hundreds of people join it for free. And it's like, yeah, I won't I won't go on a shameless plug about the course, but it's like a resource for people, living in like states of chronic stress and burnout, and how to work with plant medicines to recover. But yeah, I think in terms of identifying it, like I think everyone has their own, I call them like fault lines in my practice. So, when I am getting run down, I'll get like a bit dizzy, like I'll have like sort of vertigo and sinus issues. Someone else will have, instantaneous loose bowels, or someone else will get neck pain. And I think we have all of these signs that our body is communicating to us that we need different things, like we need rest, or we need more affection and intimacy, or emotional support, or just in sleep. But unfortunately, capitalism obviously just teaches us from a very young age to repress our feelings and ignore our bodies and not listen to those signs. So it's a really like life-changing process to become someone who's like aware of their own body and their own needs. And then, God forbid, once you know what your needs are, trying to access them when you've been socialized to think that they don't matter, for example, which is like a super gendered class thing. But yeah, I've recorded the book as a podcast as well, so people can listen to it for free. That's on my Solidarity Apothecary website. And yeah, and I just want to say about burnout that it is like a collective responsibility. And I've supported like so many people go through repression from just the smallest thing of, maybe it's a one-off arrest that doesn't go anywhere. And I've seen the impact of that stressful situation on their nervous system. And then I've supported people that have had huge, terrifying cases hanging over them for years, or people that have done 20 years in prison and got out, and have horrific PTSD. Like I've seen that kind of spectrum. But yeah, like all of these different people who have these different kind of contexts. But yeah, we all just come back to the point that like we're just humans that have like needs, and trauma ultimately like shapes us in different ways. And we can't recover like on our own. Like for someone to get out of prison, you need to build a sense of safety. But like, how do you build safety if you don't have any money and you can't get a job? And even if you get a job, maybe it's like super precarious, and maybe you don't have those like close relationships and friendships and that like social support. And I think like, we've been talking this whole podcast interview between these tensions of like how sort of politically recognized prisoner support is, and is it more sort of like, does it feel like a kind of charity thing or whatever? But like ultimately, like keeping a friend alive in prison to me felt like the epitome of anarchism, because it was, I am not letting the state kill another friend of mine, Sorry, I'm a bit tender. It's the anniversary of my friend who killed himself in prison the day before yesterday. So it's all a bit like close at the moment. But like, yeah, I think, lots of anarchist authors have written about the importance of love and relationships. And, ultimately, like that is kind of what we've got, if that makes sense. And yeah, like a person in prison, like isn't a project, right? And that's what's challenging, is like projects give us structure and boundaries and, shared responsibility. But it's just not possible in a relationship when you love someone so much to have that kind of system, because we're just human beings. And, like Bas, you mentioned, like if someone's pulled you from prison, you can't be like, oh, I have to go now because I have this thing. But yeah, I just wanted to plug that my friend Kevan Thakra, he's like a long-term prisoner in the UK who's in like literally the worst conditions of solitary confinement, and has been for a very long time. And he's just really politically active in his writing, and trying to encourage people to support prisoners. And we can put it in the show notes, but he wrote a piece called Prisoners Are Human Beings, where he kind of critiqued how some people had made him feel when he's in prison, in terms of, not replying to him or treating him like this kind of someone to brag about, that they've got a relationship with him or something, or, just like so many different interpersonal dynamics. But I love his writing because he's just really communicating like how vulnerable you are in prison to the relationships that like keep you going. And how that can be kind of like mistreated by comrades. But, thankfully, like everyone on the call, like you're all like amazing, dedicated people. So yeah. Anyway, that was a long rant, but I have to get back to the baby. Was there any last comments on that before I go?
How do you recognize when you become looked at as a resource by the prisoners that you're supporting? There was a mention earlier in like the message thread about, if a prisoner decides to rate you on Google Maps or Yelp as giving poor prisoner solidarity, or not sending enough resources, or whatever the kind of expectations, especially when people are giving so much of themselves and at points living at a lower economic standard than their comrades that are on the inside, but it's not, that's not a thing that you want to share with the person on the inside because you're not trying to make them guilty, but they maybe don't realize how hard you're struggling and how much you're not getting paid for this. It's not like you're working for a charity.
I mean, I'm so lucky that my friends in prison have just been like the best friends to me. And I think that's because, for say, Sam and Taylor, Taylor's the one who died, because I met them in prison, there was this kind of horizontal relationship at the beginning. Does that make sense? And then I get out and then I'm in like a position of power somehow. But I've never felt kind of like taken for granted or kind of dehumanized by them, if that makes sense. But I think in other collectives, like often we're like operating sometimes from like a place of anonymity, and then it's like a little bit harder. But I think, like I know, for example, experiences with comrades in Belarus, like the number of people inside and the economic pressure to fundraise for them every single month, so much bigger than what it is in the UK, that you can only spend a certain amount each month. So we don't have like the same, like we have a lot of like fundraising pressure, but I don't think it's like the stakes aren't as intense, if that makes sense. But like I think there are humans, right? And there will be difficult dynamics, like someone, develops a crush on you, or someone else slags off someone else, or whatever. Like there's always these kind of relationship challenges, communication challenges. I've never like had pushback from a prisoner that we're like a charity, or that. I think there's always been an appreciation that support is like very grassroots. And I think because it's such a novelty to people in prison in the UK, like they have just, most people I've met that I've organized support for, like IPP prisoners and things, they've never had support from anyone most of their lives. And so to even just receive letters, or to be added to a website, or for someone to organize a letter writing evening, like Taylor was trans, so lots of trans groups would organize letter writing events and send him cards and things. People have no idea like how much that meant to him, and how different that was to a life of sheer like emotional neglect and abuse. So so I think people haven't taken for granted the thing. I'll probably get a backlash for this, but like the thing that has frustrated me the most has been other so-called anarchist groups. Someone called our particular crew, said, okay, you're a bunch of like lefty charity workers, because we were like supporting people in prison, and like refused to repost action alerts for friends in prison who, were like IPP prisoners, or like quote unquote social prisoners. And that to me just still puts like rage in me, because it's just like, how fucking dare you? Like when you're in prison, like the difference between someone sending you money so that you can buy some fucking shampoo you like that doesn't give you a rash, or you can actually have a snack in the evening to take away the fucking hunger so you can sleep, like that isn't fucking charity work, Okay, like I can see some critique of You know, like I love working with prisoners who are really political, who are comrades, who want to build power in prison, who want to kind of unionize, who want to do action alerts. Like, you know, my friend Sam inside is always passing me people's details because they want to campaign or like fight against some injustice in the prison or, you know, whistleblow on something. And I love that. Like, I think as anarchists, we should be focusing on kind of organizing the prisoner class and supporting people to, you know, fight back against these systems. And that is much better than just kind of quote unquote charity work. But at the same time, yeah, I think unless someone like has been in prison, to me, they can shut their mouth, like if they think it is charity work, because it's when you're inside, I'm sorry, but a letter can sometimes be the difference between someone killing themselves or not. And that to me is why it's like so important and should be so politically high up the you know, value ladder of like what people think is politically important. You know, there's like amazing texts about the anarchist Black Cross and its history with the anarchist Red Cross and supporting prisoners. Like, and yeah, this is part of like our legacies and our traditions. So it should be, you know, like powerful, recognized, like sacred kind of work, in my opinion. I can't remember what the second question was, but I really have to leave. I'm sorry.
I think you got it. It was about whether it's charity or like feeling like it's a charity. Thank you so much. You're lovely. You do great work. Yeah, thanks.
So nice
Hear the
to see you
applause.
all. Okay, take care. Have a good rest of the interview. I can't wait to hear it. All
Bye,
right.
Nicole.
Lots of love. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
I just wanted to comment about this, that feeling of wanting to vomit when somebody like from prison calls you, right? And like you need to again, you know, offer some of your energy and, you know, share some of your empathy and, you know, do something about it and be on the supporting side. Yeah, I guess I felt it, and I think I didn't feel it back when I was supporting my partner, but I only now when many of my friends and comrades are in prison, and suddenly I needed to start writing a lot of letters again after like 5 years of not dealing with somebody in prison that I know. I suddenly like I really felt the same feeling that I didn't want to write a single letter, and I think I felt so ashamed and so guilty for that. Come on, you know, like you're here, you have time. Instead of, I don't know, scrolling your Instagram, you could write a letter. And yeah, I mean, I wrote a few, like just forcing myself to do that. But then I just realized I just can't. And so it's been 5 years almost, right? And I haven't written letters anymore. And yeah, so I think I still feel bad about it, but also I kind of realized that, okay, yeah, maybe I should just like accept that this is my boundary on that. And maybe I should just accept that, yeah, I was traumatized by that 5 years of supporting my partner and needing to write every day, like, or every second day, a letter and be there, you know. And so I just kind of, it's just like flashbacking to me. And so, yeah, I think maybe like one way out of it for me was to actually accept that, yeah, maybe I prefer to, I don't know, run a fundraiser for someone rather than talk to their relatives, you know, or I don't know, hear some frustration from a wife of a prisoner that I'm supporting, you know. And so I think that should be also normalized, and we kind of have to understand and also, yeah, like put boundaries with in the communication with the people that, you know, are involved in the support. That, yeah, we are there, but also that there's not 100% that I can be always there for someone, and not with any type of activity, for example, because I guess because you could make demonstrations, right? You can write letters, you can organize letter writings, you can fundraise, you can give donations yourself, right? You know, like, and there's so many ways that you can be in solidarity with someone. And if you want to start doing all of them, it's just not like you are not enough for that. And I think what also is a little bit haunting me in this way is that I realize that my feeling of like I don't know, failure, or the fact that this movement kind of collapsed, or, it's not anymore in the same shape and form as it used to be, or in the shape and form that I think the prisoners are expecting it to be when they're out, right? So I kind of feel responsible for how the reality looks like and for the world that they're like, I'm going to see when they are being released. And so I kind of feel like I don't want to talk or see some of my friends or comrades when they are released. Not that I don't want to see them as people, but it's more like all these uncomfortable conversations about why we found ourselves in this situation and how are they going to integrate in this world where there's like literally no comrades anymore that they know, and so I kind of feel that again I am responsible for that, or like I am responsible for leading them in this world, which I'm not, and I mean I don't have to, but it's just like I think that the problem that I mentioned in the first place, that this kind of feeling a specialized force gives so much pressure on me that I feel like it's just me who can do that and not other people. And if I am the person who says no to this, then I'm going to be like the last person that ever hears this question, like there's no other people, there's no other friends, there's no other comrades who could do things like me. And so, yeah, and I think maybe I am too Masha-centric, in this way, because the world does not spin around me, and in the end, right? So, and people have other friends and family. So, but that's what I wanted to say about this feeling of like not wanting to do certain types of activity. And I think I liked how Nicole kind of found her way out of burnout by trying to actually because why she started writing about it, I guess, right, is like because she realized, okay, this is really affecting me, and so I want to journal in it's a way of journaling, right? Like you're writing about something you experience, and then you find feedback from people who experience the same, or who say, yes, this is so important that you're talking about this, and then it becomes your passion work, and then you make it politicized. And so it's like, I guess if we're like asking ourselves what are the ways out, is probably like acknowledging that, yeah, this is my limit, and now I'm going to talk about this limit so the whole world hears me, and I'm going to write or record something about it, and then I'm going to be in the conversation with the movement about it, and then maybe all of us get some useful stuff from it. So that's what I wanted to say.
I had a funny story about letters and responsibility to write it. My ex-partner, with whom I started relationship after he was in prison. The first question he asked me when we met for the first time was, you haven't ever write me letters, right? And I felt like it was kind of attack on me that I should to write him letters, but I didn't. And about burnout, I tried to keep forcing myself to slow down. And in fact, the more repressive it becomes, the more clearly you realize the impossibility of reaching out to all those you genuinely want to help. For example, I'm horrified by the thought that thousands and thousands of Ukrainians have been kidnapped and incarcerated in Russian prisons, and the community's efforts are insufficient even to find each of them. And I feel huge responsibility on this case. But I'm learning to recognize that my efforts will always be not enough, which means I just need to do the best I can. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really insightful. So we've got the question about toxic dynamics, because you both kind of addressed burnout. Would it be helpful for anyone to readdress that question as a whole, or do you think that was sufficient on the topic of burnout?
I think the big role in the emergence of service relationships between prisoners and activists was played, of course, by NGO policies and the ideas of so-called efficiency. And we as a collective get a lot, I would say too many letters to the collective's mailbox, just asking for money or for a lawyer. Even though we constantly remind on our resources, on socials or website, that we are just an ethical collective with crowdfunding sources and know our own foundation, and try to spread the message that anyone can organize a solidarity group on the ground. And often we get passive-aggressive replies in response to us saying we can't help. I think the Russian propaganda, which paints the image of activists and human rights defenders as some kind of Western-funded agents, is also doing this trick. And for me, it's not even clear whether it's necessary to convince some mother of a prisoner that we are actually a group of anarchists who, in addition to organizing, often earn our living costs through other service work. And of course, moments like this make us wonder how and why we got to this point where the desire for solidarity needs to be explained to someone in pre-political categories that have always seemed obvious to me, to us. And of course, it's angering and disorienting.
Okay, I guess you talked about rather the service and NGO stuff, right? Rather than the toxic dynamics between supporters and prisoners, I guess. But I mean, I can go on with that and just say, yeah, like this service perception of groups that give support. Also, I think what I find problematic is that they kind of strip you off a political element, right, of your work. Because like I said at the beginning, when we were forming the collective, for us, it wasn't like, okay, we are now just wanting to support prisoners for the rest of our lives and not be activists in any other ways. No, it was more like, yeah, the movement needs that, right? And so we are offering, like, we make a division of activists who remain in the movement and who continue doing political work because we also see it as political. And I think, unfortunately, after 2020, when we also had to restructure the work of the collective and partly operate in exile and stuff, so we also became a little bit more like fundraisers because there's so many prisoners, and we mostly speak about them and about the money that they need. But also in many cases, the regime, they prevented the prisoners from talking to the solidarity groups, to the relatives, and maybe producing the political messages, right? So the trials were held in camera, the correspondence is banned in many ways, and basically the prisoner becomes this apolitical humanitarian object, I would say, not even subject. And then we cannot comment on their ideas because it might be a problem for them. And so we stop talking about politics in this way. And then we are also seen mostly as, that we can be approached mostly as, give us money or help us find a lawyer and stuff like that. And so I guess this, it changes your identity in this way. And this is not something we want to do. But unfortunately, this is how it is. And also, I was meaning to ask Anya about this, because I think when I first got to know you and the collective and everything, and I realized, okay, you have two. Tell me if this is not something that you can or want to talk about publicly, but I'm going to ask about this. okay, you, but also some other collectives said that, okay, like there is a way to donate to prisoners, right? And there's also a way to donate to the collective, like to the work and to basically sustenance cost of the people in the collective. And, and like for me, that was like, oh, wow. Was it like even is it even legal, like to do something like this? Because we've never asked ourselves in the collective, for example, can we cover any costs, or like can we like use the money that we receive for that, for ourselves, in this way, like, yeah. And so for me, that was an interesting approach. And I wanted to ask you, how is it going? Like, how are people reacting to this? Are you actually receiving any kind of donations for this work? Because I think that this is exactly how we can see if people are even accepting this request for, hey, please finance us too, not like as a salary, but like just because we cannot work while we're doing this type of activism, And so this question, but also I realized that how much the work of the collectives are neglected in this way. For example, when I'm comparing this to the Solidarity collectives in Ukraine, right, that are dealing with supporting the anti-authoritarian fighters on the front lines. And so I've talked about them with them, and they were saying that, yeah, like most of them need some more subsidies, some like money from the outside to just keep living, like, because many of them lost their jobs. Some of them are experiencing, destructions in their homes, that are not covered by the state, or, and they need all this money. Some of them get depressed because of the war that is there for 3 years, right? And so, and they're still like afraid or ashamed to ask publicly, for example, to post that, yeah, you can also donate for our own needs, because they are not like, it's not enough, like it's, if somebody can die in the front line, they need the money, but not us. And so I was thinking about it, and like I was also thinking of, is there any foundation that can help in cases like this? Like, can they apply to, I don't know, anti-fascist defense fund or anarchist defense fund? Actually, they can, like, because most of these funds, they support people that are repressed or suffered something, and war is not repression, right? So it's like, if you just, like if your windows are broken because of a bomb, this is not something that, like any existing foundation that I know of can help with, And so this also shows that how important it is to be in this community, like that the community understands that this is not like an individual case, that somebody doesn't have a job, or like somebody's window is broken, or that somebody is depressed because of doing solidarity work for 10 years or something like this. So this is something that like we started doing our work as a political act, then other people have to also accept, like not accept, but like recognize this and also do some political acts towards us, because we are like still comrades in this way. So like coming back to my question, so how did it work? Does it work for you to kind of get the donations for the work you're doing, Anya?
We decided when we invented this call to our audience, we decided to separate the donations from people for prisoners and for the collective. For the collective, we started Patreon page, and all the donations we collect from other sources, we spent only for prisoners' needs. For me, it was like the most clear policies for collecting money for us. And we started to do that because some of us ended up in not so sweet immigration, like, for example, mine, because I'm in Europe, and some part of our collective are in Georgia or Armenia, where they have no, like, some money from state, or they even have no possibility to find paid work there. And it's not only migrant problem, it's the same for Georgian or Armenian residents. There are not so much work that can cover your very basic needs, rent for your room or flat, and just a very basic menu for everyday surviving. So we decided that we really need to support somehow those who in not, how to say, stable maybe situation, but I can't name my situation stable because of other migrant troubles. Yeah, and I think it's an important part to speak about that we do this political work and work of care, but we also need to be able to do that. And each of us, I think, know that it can last for 10 and more years because of huge prison terms. And we don't know if we can change our living environments for something better. So we need to survive somehow to keep on doing. And yeah, for me, it's important to separate this call to prisoner support in different ways, like financially, with writing letters, with raising awareness, and to help the collective to go on.
Well, that kind of addressed, the last few responses kind of addressed the prompt about how do we socialize the work of prisoner support by finding ways to spread it out further among our movements so that, in this very clear way that Anya was speaking of, getting support in supporting others. Yeah, that's really important. Did you have any other thoughts on that before I maybe prompt more about toxic dynamics that can come up with individual prisoners and challenging that?
Well, I think maybe what would be perfect for me is thinking about this whole concept of labor division, let's say, in the movement as something that is done on a rotation basis, or something that is not just some people decided, some 5 people, let's say, decided that they would like to suddenly do that, and other 10 people are doing another thing. So it would be perfect in my ideal world. The movement would be just, deciding what they need in what form for how long, and then they would basically send people to do the work there, and on a rotation basis, understanding that doesn't have to be always the same people doing the same work forever, but we can all learn how to be in solidarity, how to arrange lawyers, how to I don't think it's possible in the current situation that the movement are facing, and the shape of the movements right now. I don't think we're ready to work on the collective level like that, especially in the West, where everything is so individualized and nobody owes anything to anyone anymore. So yeah, otherwise, I guess probably this should be done by the collectives themselves, understanding that, how do we make ourselves, what is it called? Resilient, right? And ongoing and long-term work. How is it going to be organized? If we all feel tired, so how do we, what is our communication? What is our message to the movement about it? And so rather than me always, many cases finding myself in this lonely corner, grumpy about some things, probably makes sense to actually open up and talk to people and say it, and see the response. And then if there's no response, then you decide, okay, like then I do make my decision on an individual level. Like, am I able to go on, or I'm just shutting down some projects or some areas of activities, And so, yeah, so that would be probably the best. But also, what I saw is the best functioning and efficient groups. Like solidarity groups are usually the people that are the most, or the closest to the specific prisoner, because they are, like if it's my friend, I'm usually more motivated to fight for them and like wait for them as long as it takes, rather than I'm just like joining and then unjoining a group. And so maybe it would be more it would be better if there would be like little cluster groups for every prisoner that could for sure exchange and like use the same resources, for example, rather than there would be like one separate specialized group that is doing some things for all the prisoners at the same time. So that would be my wish, but yeah, I'm not sure it's possible to.
Do we want to address specifically toxic dynamics that come up with prisoners and prisoners' families in terms of charity models? Or where do we want to move from here?
Maybe I have a little addition to what I told about before, is that at some point I can understand the prisoners' relatives when they are addressing us like we are a source of money, because most of prisons in Russia located in very, very different regions, and unfortunately, like the territory of Russia is too big, and obviously needs to be much smaller. And for like prisoners' friends and family, it can be not affordable to travel to even meet the person. It's also, for me, the point of keeping the connection with movement, with others from outside, because in lots of cases, the families have no chance to meet someone in prison. And yeah, I can imagine how it affects like seeking for money, for financial help at first.
I mean, I have something to say about this dynamics of like about this power dynamics of making a prisoner like this kind of humanitarian project. But I don't know if this is, it's not, if it's the topic of our conversation, because yeah, it is about the dynamic. And this is what we as a collective have been fighting a little bit recently, but it's not really like about us. It's more about like people on the supporting side deciding what's best for the prisoner, And so I don't know how much this is like, I need to say this.
It kind of feels like it could be, if you do want to talk about it, a reflective of there's a lack of mutuality that sometimes can develop when somebody is viewed as a project or when we're viewed as service providers. And so I think it does relate to that. So if you do want to go into that a little bit, then that could be a good topic, and maybe we could have some closing thoughts after.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so in our experience as Belarusian solidarity group supporting prisoners, we are not like, it's important to note that we are not like, anarchists are not the only prisoners in Belarus that like are convicted on political grounds. I think it's like several thousands. And so what we've been dealing with is that for many of the other prisoners getting into prison, and for their families in many ways, the fact that somebody from their family gets in jail, they don't look at this as a political case. They see, it's like just the state is not fair to them. And so they choose to either minimize the the weight or the influence of the politics in this case, and say, oh yeah, this person didn't do anything, not like the other terrorists, or like not like the other anyone, And so that is now has created a dynamics in which part of this like diasporic exiled movement that is intending to free all the political prisoners has started to promote this idea of like, hey, we need to get back into the dialogue with the regime and ask the regime to like release all these prisoners that are just like soft, nice, kitty cats that haven't really meant what they did, And so what and this is usually done by the relatives and because like I said, the relatives in Belarusian case, they became the only point of contact with the prisoner. And so if relatives say, oh, our prisoner doesn't want to be considered a political prisoner because it can harm them. Oh, stop writing, for example, stop making solidarity actions, or stop publishing anything about that prisoner because it can harm them, And so what it does is basically it creates another shift, another disbalance in this support work, because suddenly the prisoner and their ideas, the reasons, the motivations why they ended up behind bars, what they feel, how they feel about what their family is doing on the outside or what their solidarity group is doing on the outside, it becomes like negligent and inexistent, and it's expected from everybody else that we are only going to talk, I don't know, we're not going to publish anything about them because this can harm. We're not going to talk about their politics. We're not going to call them anarchists because this can be a problem. And so what we found problematic is that some families really want us, like the solidarity group, to shut up about certain things, and then, but we know for sure, because we know our comrades, that they would most probably be against this, but we cannot confirm it in any way because we are not relatives and we cannot talk to them in any way. And so that creates this problem that people, like the family, however non-political it might be, sometimes it's even, like anti-political, or like the political views in the family can be contradicting to the prisoner's political views. And so they become this kind of carer, like a caretaker of the prisoner, and they, like their message sounds more loud in this way. And this is why we wrote like a longer text, unfortunately only in Russian, about this idea of thinking what's best for the prisoner, or thinking that, oh, we should do that, oh, we should do this. And also it creates a lot of divergence between different kinds of prisoners. And this is exactly what the state wants. It wants that the prisoners and their relatives are divided, and some identify themselves as, oh, we did something unconsciously, like we didn't do it deliberately. Maybe we left a little comment online that was offensive, but we didn't mean it. And the others are like the real criminals, like they kind of deserve to be in jail. And usually people with the shorter terms, they prefer to be like anonymous, because this is like they're gonna get out in 3 years, and so they don't want to be public, like they don't want their case to be publicized, while people who with stints of 20 plus years, like their families are usually the most loud, because they don't have this uh, mm, hope, right, that the prisoner will be released sooner if they shut up, for example. That's not going to happen. And so the idea here is that we as a collective are trying to always, analyze how much we are playing in this power dynamics, and how we end up treating or not treating our prisoners as these like cases, that we just work on, and we are waiting for this case to just be over. And so, we're trying to like check ourselves on that, but it's also quite hard. because the society, like the public or the families, are expecting a completely different thing. Because for the family, they don't need you to stay anarchist. They don't need you to, keep to your ideas. They don't need you to. They just want you back in the family, and that's it. And so, for us, this is also where the political part and this kind of humanitarian and charitable, let's say, and political side of this lies in.
Yeah, Anya, is that a dynamic that you feel like commenting on, or should we just move into a closing thoughts?
Yeah, I have a note that I see here actually two problematic, poisonous Soviet narratives. On the one hand, it's kind of Tavarish Stalin, there is a horrible mistake, often reproduced by relatives of the prisoners, like Masha said about innocence and mistake in criminal case and believing in justice in our courts and our prison system, which is surely can't work as relatives want to imagine this system. And on the other hand, in relation to our everyday work, everyday political development, other narrative is about glorification of shock workers and that we are not allowed to have breaks, not allowed to be tired, and the idea of shame, of needing to recover. And yeah, for me, these two narratives intersecting a lot in rhetorics around prisoners and around prison systems. That, yeah, we should work a lot, but we also should be as silent as possible, and we should gain resources, but not write anything that can cause harm to prisoner and so on.
Well, thank you all for participating in this conversation. I think that you've given listeners a lot to think about and hopefully talk about. And I wonder if any of you have any closing thoughts that you want to share with the audience before we end this call, or tell us where we can find out more information about the groups that you participate in and want to uplift.
I don't have any more thoughts, just appreciations for creating the space, because I felt like I needed it. I felt like, even though I know both Anya and Nicole, right, and I could talk to them, but I didn't, because that was not, was not structured in any way. And again, even though it's kind of showing that even though we might know people that might go through the same, we are sometimes struggling with approaching them and learning from them, or sharing some emotional burdens with them. Because in my case, I just feel like, okay, there's going to be just another emotional burden on that person, because they already is having so much on their shoulders. So yeah, thanks for the space, and hopefully it was useful not only for us, for me, but also for the listeners. And our group is easily Googled, I guess, and you might probably leave some information in the show notes. It's abcbelarus.org. And we are welcoming donations, of course, and unfortunately no letters will reach the prisoners in Belarus, but you could still and again, like I was saying about this decentralization of solidarity a little bit. And for example, we have this little project where we are inviting people to create a little solidarity group that doesn't need to do much other than just gather some donations on the monthly basis, and thus cover up the expenses of like one Belarusian anarchist in prison, that would be immensely helpful for us. Rather than fundraising for all of them, we could have like a few groups that would take care of like selected prisoners, and then it would lift some burden from us. So yeah, if you're interested, like talk to us, contact us, and otherwise just stay safe and sane.
Yeah, I also would like to say thank you for this conversation. It was really important to me, and I need to think about what we discussed. And I hope this will give some ground to multiple discussions about this labor of care and definitions of care, charity, solidarity, and political work. Yeah. And I think there are many ways to help each other. And maybe the only thing I didn't mention yet is that the help can be not only financial. At some cases, it can be, I don't know, inviting an activist group to borrow a lakeside house for a week and just get a chance to switch off daily struggles. It can be not so visible, but I see now that we have no option to rotate yet because we are too few. And maybe the only way to go on with this work is to care about each other and develop some ways to care, some dialogue, discussion in the movement about ways to recover and mutually reinforce each other. Yeah, and as a collective, we also can be found. I can share links in the chat. And we have a lot of texts on our experiences, which we are happy to share with others to involve others and inspire maybe them to create multiple solidarity groups and care about anyone they feel connection with.
Lovely. I really like that idea of sharing lakeside houses with groups that you have respect for. I think that's a really, really nice idea. So anyone has a beachfront property in North Carolina that they want to share, they can contact the show hosts. We're happy to do that. Take advantage of it. Thank you all of you for participating in this conversation again. And solidarity.
Thanks for having us and organizing it.
Yeah, pleasure. This is The Final Straw Radio. The show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions and suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net or thefinalstrawradio@protonmail.com. If you'd like to use any episode for your project or radio show, feel free to do so. Just send us an email to let us know. If you care to, you can send us letters at TFSR, P.O. Box 6004, Asheville, North Carolina, 28816. Programming support is brought to you by Firestorm Books. Located at 1022 Haywood Road in West Asheville, Firestorm is a bookstore and social movement space owned by its workers, in operation since 2008. Their event calendar and complete catalog of books can be found online at firestorm.coop.
Thanks so much for listening to the Frontline Herbalism podcast. You can find the transcript, the links, all the resources from the show at solidarityApothecary.org/podcast.